Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of West African folktales written down by W.H. Barker. In the first story, we see why man is the most dangerous animal. In the second story, we learn why tigers aren't so eager to attack humans. And in the final story, we hear a tale that has echoes from Dumb John from the Creole folktales. Okay, let's begin. Story number 1, The Ungrateful Man. A hunter who was terribly poor was walking one day through the forest in search of food. Coming to a deep hole, there he found a leopard, a serpent, a rat, and a man. These had all fallen into the trap and were unable to get out again. Seeing the hunter, they begged him to help them get out of the hole. At first, he did not wish to release any of them but the man. The leopard, he said, had often stolen his cattle and eaten them. The serpent very frequently bit men and caused their deaths. The rat did no good to anyone. He saw no use in setting them free. However, these animals pleaded so hard for life that at last he helped each of them out of the pit. Each, in turn, promised to reward him for his kindness, except the man. He, saying he was very poor, was taken home by the hunter with a kind heart and allowed to stay with him. A short time after, Serpent came to the hunter and gave him a very powerful antidote for snake poison. "Keep it carefully," said the serpent. "You will find it very useful one day. When you are using it, be sure to ask for the blood of a traitor to mix it with." The hunter, having thanked the serpent very much, took great care of the powder and always carried it about with him. The leopard also showed his gratitude by killing animals for the hunter and supplying him with food for many weeks. Then, one day, the rat came to him and gave him a large bundle. "These are some native cloths, gold dust, and ivory. They will make you rich," said the rat. The hunter thanked the rat very heartily and took the bundle to his cottage. After this, the hunter was able to live in great comfort. He built himself a fine new house and supplied it with everything needful. The man whom he had taken out of the pit still lived with him. This man, however, was of an envious disposition. He was not at all pleased at his host's good fortune, and was only waiting for an opportunity to do him some harm. Very soon he had his chance. A proclamation was sounded throughout the country to say that some of the robbers had broken into the king's palace and stolen his jewels and many other valuables. The ungrateful man instantly hurried to the king and asked what the reward would be if he pointed out the thief. The king promised him to half of the things which had been stolen. The wicked fellow thereupon falsely accused his host of the theft, although he knew quite well that he was innocent. The honest hunter was immediately thrown into prison. Then he was brought into court and requested to show how he had become so rich. He told them, faithfully, the source of his income, but no one believed him. He was condemned to die the following day at noon. Next morning, while preparations were being made for his execution, word was brought to the prison that the king's eldest son had been bitten by a serpent and was dying. Anyone who could cure him was begged to come and do so. The hunter immediately thought of the powder which his serpent friend had given him, and asked to be allowed to use it. At first they were unwilling to let him try, but finally he received permission. The king asked him if there was anything he needed for it, and he replied, "A traitor's blood to mix it with." His Majesty immediately pointed out that the wicked fellow who had accused the hunter and said, "There stands the worst traitor, for he gave up the kind host who had saved his life." The man was at once beheaded, and the powder was mixed as the serpent had commanded. As soon as it was applied to the prince's wound, the young man was cured. In great delight, the king loaded the hunter with honors and sent him home happily. The end. Okay, and story number 2, Why tigers never attack men unless they are provoked. A man hunting one day in the forest met a tiger. At first, each was afraid of the other, but after some time talking, they became quite friendly. They agreed to live together for a little time. First, the man would live with the tiger in his forest home for 2 weeks. Then the tiger would come and live in the man's home. The tiger behaved so well to the man during his visit that the man felt he had never been so well treated in all of his life. Then came the time for the tiger to return home with the man. As they were going, the tiger was somewhat afraid. He asked the man if he really thought that he would be safe. "What if your friends do not like my face and kill me?" he asked. "You need fear nothing," said the host. "No one will touch you while I am there." The tiger therefore came to the man's house and stayed with him for 3 weeks. He had brought his male cub with him, and the young tiger became friendly with the man's son. Some months later, the man's father died. When Tiger heard of his friend's great loss, he and his cub set out at once to see them and console them. They brought a large sum of money to help the man. As Tiger was going home again, 2 of the man's friends lay in hiding for him and shot him. Fortunately, he was not killed, but he was very much grieved lest these men who shot him at his friend's wish. He was determined to find out if the man had known anything at all about the shot. Accordingly, he went to the place in the forest where he had first met his friend. There he lay down as if he were dead, after telling his cub to watch and see what would happen. By and by, the man came along. When he saw the tiger lying, as he thought, dead, he was terribly troubled. He began to cry and mourn for his friend, and sat there all night long with the tiger's cub, to watch that no harm should befall the body. When the morning came, and Tiger was quite assured that his friend had nothing to do at all with being shot, he was very glad. He got up and then, to the man's great astonishment, explained why he had pretended to be dead. "Go home," said the tiger, "and remember me always. In future, for your sake, I will never touch a man unless he first meddles with me." The end. And story number 3, the Omanhene who liked riddles. The Omanhene is a chief of a village. A certain Omanhene had 3 sons who were very anxious to see the world. They went to their father and asked his permission to travel. This permission he readily gave. It was the turn of the eldest to go first. He was provided with a servant and all he could possibly require for the journey. After traveling for some time, he came to a town where lived an Omanhene who loved riddles. Being a stranger, the traveler was, according to custom, brought by the people before the chief. The latter explained to him that they had certain laws in their village. One such law was that every stranger must beat the Omanhene in answering riddles, or he would be beheaded. He must prepare to begin the contest the following morning. Next day he came to the assembly place, and found the Omanhene there with all of his attendants. The Omanhene asked many riddles. As the young man was unable to answer any of them, he was judged to have failed and was beheaded. After some time, the second son of the Omanhene started on his travels. By a strange chance, he arrived at the same town where his brother had died. He was also asked many riddles and failed to answer them. Accordingly, he too was put to death. By and by, the third brother announced his intention to travel. His mother did all in her power to persuade him to stay at home, but it was all in vain. She was sure that if he also reached the town where his brothers had died, the same thing would happen to him. Rather than allow this, she thought she would prefer him to die on the way. She prepared a food for him called kanki, which she filled with poison. Having packed it away in his bag, he set off. Very soon he began to feel hungry. Knowing, however, that his mother had not wished him to leave home, and therefore might have put some poison in the food. He thought he would test it before eating it himself. Seeing a vulture nearby, he threw half a cake to it. The bird ate the conky and immediately fell dead by the roadside. 3 panthers came along and began to eat the vulture. They also fell dead. The young man cut off some of the flesh of the panthers and roasted it. Then he carefully packed it away in his bundle. A little further on, he was attacked by 7 highway robbers. They wanted to kill him at once. He told them that he had some good roast meat in his bundle and invited them to eat with him first. They agreed and divided up the food into 8 parts. While they were eating, the young man carefully hid his portion. Soon, all the 7 robbers fell ill and died. The young man went on his way. At last he reached the town where his brothers had died. Like them, he was summoned to the assembly place to answer the riddles of the Omanhene. For 2 days the contest proved equal. At the end of that time, the young man said, "I have only 1 riddle left. If you are able to answer that, you may put me to death." He then gave the Omanhene this riddle: half kills 1, 1 kills 3, 3 kills 7. The ruler failed to answer it that evening, so it was postponed till the next day. During the night, the Omanhene disguised himself and went to the house where the stranger was staying. There he found the young man asleep in the hall. Imagining that the man before him was the stranger's servant, and never at once dreaming that it was the stranger himself, he roused the sleeper and promised him a large reward if he would give him the solution to the riddle. The young man replied that he would tell the answer if the Omanhene would bring him the costume which he always wore at the assembly. The ruler was only too pleased to go and fetch it for him. When the young man had the garments quite safely, he explained the riddle fully to the crafty Omanhene. He said that as he was leaving home, the mother of his master made him the conky. In order to find out if the conky was good, they gave half of it to a vulture. The latter died. 3 panthers that tasted the vulture also died. A little of the panther's roasted flesh killed 7 robbers. The Omanhene was delighted to have found out the answer. He warned the supposed servant not to tell his master of what had happened. In the morning, all the villagers assembled together. The Omanhene proudly gave the answer to the riddle as if he himself had found it out. But the young man asked him to produce his ceremonial dress, which he ought to be wearing in the assembly. This, of course, he was unable to do, as the young man had hidden away carefully. The stranger then told what had happened in the night, and how the ruler had got the answer to the riddle by cheating. The assembly declared that the Omanhene had failed to find out the riddle and must die. Accordingly, he was beheaded, and the young man was appointed the Omanhene in his place. The end. Well, the first story reminds me of an Indian story, which also warns about men, and there's a snake, and there's, I think, another tiger or something. But this one had some cool Ghanaian twists, and so I really enjoyed it. In the second story, I really liked the relationship between the tiger and the human in the story. It was really nice to see that the tiger didn't die, and that the man did not try to trick him. And in the third story, I heard an echo of Dumb John from Louisiana. Riddle battles to the death and poison baked goods. This really made me smile. There aren't many stories left in this book, but I already have another one ready to go when this one is done. And the podcast shoutout is to the Espooky Tales podcast. If you like hearing paranormal stories, especially with a connection to Latin culture, this is the pod for you. Cristina and Carmen are excellent hosts, and occasionally do episodes in Spanish. And so if you like their show as much as I do, go and give them a like, a listen, and a review. And the listener shoutout is to Georgetown, Guyana. I got this part from Google. Georgetown is Guyana's capital, on the South America's North Atlantic coast. The city is culturally connected to the English-speaking Caribbean region and home to British colonial architecture, including the tall, Gothic-style St. George's Anglican Cathedral. A clock tower rises above Stabroek Market, popular for local goods. The Guyana National Museum traces the country's history, while the Borda hosts cricket matches. Thanks, Google. I love that the capital has influences from the Dutch, the English, and the French. And it seems like a really lovely city, and I hope to see it someday. Really, it'd be a lot of fun to go down there. And so to my listener in Georgetown, I say thank you and good night.